life is really short. You got to do the things that you want to do. So push yourself harder than you think it actually is possible. When other people are tired, when other people are challenged, everyone else is feeling that too, right? Your competition is feeling that too. So you can use that as an advantage when you can keep pushing through things.
Welcome to the Hard Way podcast with Joe Sena, founder and CEO of Spartan Races. We're teaching you how to overcome your obstacles in your life the same way we teach our 10 million plus Spartans to overcome obstacles on the course. With insight from the smartest, most accomplished experts from every corner of the world. Get ready to elevate your life today.
Joe Sena, CEO and founder of Spartan, host of the Hard Way podcast. I've got a buddy of mine on, Leif Babin. This guy is a badass Navy SEAL. Everybody wants to be a Navy SEAL. Everybody wishes they were a Navy SEAL. Welcome aboard.
I appreciate it, Joe. It's great to be with you. I'm no badass. I got to serve with some badasses and work with some extraordinary people in my time in the SEAL teams and beyond. But just honored and proud to have served. But certainly no badass. If anything, what qualifies me to talk about leadership like we do today is I've made about every mistake that you could possibly make. So I certainly would not put myself in the badass category in any way, shape, or form.
I was on a flight this morning coming into Boston, and I had a half hour to kill right before we came touchdown. And I was looking through Paramount Plus for something to keep me busy, my mind busy. And there was a Navy SEAL show on, and I knew I wasn't going to be able to see the whole thing. But out of the 20 other shows that were available to me, that's the one I honed in on, because I guess as human beings, especially Americans, right, we know, probably not unique to Americans, we know what you had to do, what that, process looked like to get from wherever you grew up to that point. Must have been a hell of a ridiculous amount of work. Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in rural Southeast Texas, a little town called Woodville, Texas, in the piney woods of East Texas, about 2 hours northeast of Houston. And it was an awesome place to grow up. It was a great community. We played in the woods, and it was always wars with spears, and it wasn't cowboys and Indians. It was always just Indians. We always just attacked each other, and but it was always war of some way, shape, or form. And I always wanted to be some kind of a combat leader. And when I started reading about the SEAL teams and hear about the SEAL teams, by the time I was in junior high school, I started trying to get my hands on every book I could read about the SEAL teams. And so I went to the Naval Academy to pursue that dream. And I did not get selected out of the Naval Academy for the SEAL program. So it took me quite a few years to even get a chance to go.
Is it common for folks to not get selected and then fight their way in, or is that pretty unique?
Yeah, it's definitely, it's very competitive. It's super competitive, to join the SEAL program. I think particularly as an officer, because there's a lot of people competing for a smaller number of billets. I knew for me, it was a challenge to go to the Naval Academy. We had, they have quite a few, they have many more billets today. So there's I don't know what it is. It's 32 billets available, for people that are graduating from the Naval Academy class. But at the time we had 16, and we had a prior enlisted SEAL in my class who was obviously going to go back to the SEAL teams. So there's only 15 of us who got selected, and I was not one of those 15. And frankly, it was soul crushing because I turned down an appointment to West Point. I wanted to be some kind of a combat leader. That's what I wanted to do in my life. And I really, the SEAL program, as I said, I read all these books. The movie with Charlie Sheen that come out in the early 1990s, Navy SEALs, that was one that was highly influential on me. And so there was a bunch of us that wanted to do that out of the Naval Academy. And, probably 200 people went out for the screener. And I think 80 something guys graduated from the screening program, so they were eligible to go. And they took 15, and probably, 30 or 40 of those guys were outstanding people that could have done really, really well in a SEAL program. So it actually, as crushing as it was for me to not get selected for the SEAL program, I went to the surface fleet, and I spent 3 years on 2 different Navy ships, and it thrust me right into leadership positions. I sailed all over the world. It was actually a fantastic experience for me in the surface fleet. And I realized that I was going to have to work hard just to get a chance to go. And so it gave me a perspective. So I had to put in a lot of extra time, a lot of extra work, be the best surface warfare officer I could be on those Navy ships, get letters of recommendation. And then I reached out to friends of mine that were in the SEAL program, and there were several of them that pulled tons of strings for me and connected me with people that could write great letters of recommendation. And so by the time I got selected to go, it gave me a perspective going through that training program with other people were feeling sorry for themselves or really, thinking about how difficult training was, I was just thankful for the opportunity to go. And that 3 years that it took me to get there, I think was extremely valuable. And really the idea too, it taught me this concept that we now call extreme ownership. I could point fingers and make excuses and cast blame and say, well, I should have gone instead of that person, or they got lucky because they knew this person, or, they happen to be a better athlete than me, or they made better grades than me, but that doesn't make them a better person. And instead, I had to take ownership of doing better. I had to train harder physically to do better on the physical screening test. I had to get better letters of recommendation. I had to reach out to people and build relationships with people that could write letters of recommendation that could help me out. And so I had to do the work, and it took discipline to do that. And thankfully I had a ton of people that were willing to help me along the way that made the difference. But it gave me a very valuable perspective that I was thankful for.
As I listened to you on extreme ownership, obviously I know the book, I know the saying, I know you guys, all the great work you do. But as I listened to you just now, I thought about, did I ever learn extreme ownership? Was I a typical person that just came up with excuses every day? And my mind, as you were talking, went back to my childhood. And I ran a business at a young age, and I guess I learned it. Like, who was I going to complain to? If I couldn't make payroll, it was my problem, right? So I guess business owners learn it faster than most civilians.
I think that's probably true. I think anytime that you're thrust in charge of something, you got to figure out very quickly what works and what doesn't work. And extreme ownership works, right? If you're going to point fingers and cast blame, make excuses, you're never going to actually get problems solved. But if you take ownership of problems and implement solutions to get those problems solved, that actually works. And so whether you call it extreme ownership or not, I think anybody that's successful in any way, shape, or form is due to the fact that they understand this concept and they're able to figure out ways to get problems solved.
Obviously, everybody listening loves what you've done for the country. Like you are truly an American hero, and I'm not just blowing smoke. But you left that. You were successful. You probably, I don't know. You probably could have retired completely, but then you throw yourself into becoming a business owner, which is a shit show. It's a shit. Like, owning a business is a nightmare. And you tell me if you agree with that or not. You happy you did it?
Yeah, I think for me, I never wanted to do anything but be in the SEAL teams. And I'm no hero, by the way, Joe. I appreciate the kind words. I served with heroes like Mark Lee and Ryan Jobe and Mike Mansour that gave their lives. That I was honored and proud to serve alongside. I served with some incredible people in the SEAL teams, learned so much from them. But I think for me, a lot of people don't realize if in the military, if you don't serve 20 years, unless you're medically retired, you don't get a retirement. So people are saying, hey, you're walking. I left at the 13-year mark. And people said, hey, you're walking away from a $500,000 401k. That's not a good business decision. They were probably right. I think if people are in that boat, they should probably stick around and get their retirement. Put in the years to do it. And as I said, I never wanted to do anything else but be in the SEAL teams. That was my dream job. It's the best job in the world. But I think for me at that 13-year mark, I knew that I'd already really been promoted out of doing the things that I like to do and being a SEAL platoon commander in our tactical operating unit and being with the guys that I like to be around. So at that point, I just felt like, and there was family things that were going on with me too. My wife and I had been on opposite sides of the country. Her job kept her in New York City. I was stationed in San Diego. The closest they were going to get me was Washington, D.C. So I felt like it was the right time for me. I was a little frustrated with how SEALs are being employed, or maybe a lack of employment. In the conflict, Afghanistan was still hot and heavy at that point. In 2010, 2011, when I left active duty. And so I was not super happy with how SEALs were being employed. I felt there's a lot more that we could do, a lot more impact that we could have. And so I decided it was right for me to get out. And I was going to go back to school. And then I realized that life is short. Several of my good friends were killed in a helicopter that was shot down. Extortion 17 was a call sign. That was the largest single loss of life for any incident in Afghanistan, and the largest in any single incident in the SEAL teams in our long history. And so it was a horrible tragedy, and it was a reminder of a lesson that I already knew, which was life is really short. You got to do the things that you want to do. So I took a deferment at school. I didn't start school. My wife asked me she's a journalist, so she asked some very detailed questions about, okay, well, now what do you want to do? What is it that you love to do? And I love being a SEAL platoon commander. That was the best job in the world, but I couldn't go back to that job. But as I thought about it, I had been a leadership instructor when Jocko and I came back from the Battle of Ramadi in 2006, and he took over training for the West Coast SEAL teams, and I ran training for all the junior officers going through our SEAL training pipeline. And for 2 years, I tried to teach them everything I wish someone had taught me. I love that job, and it was incredibly rewarding to pass on leadership lessons learned. And so I told my wife, Jenna, I was like, that was a job that I really loved. I got so much out of that job, so much fulfillment when these junior officers would come back from different combat zones and tell me how the leadership lessons that I taught them had a huge impact. And so she said, you should call Jocko and start a leadership company. So that's how we got started as Echelon Front. I realized about a year into it that Jocko had planted that seed with me about 2 years before that, when he had just asked me what it would take to come on board and start a leadership company. And I threw out some giant number that seemed astronomical at the time, to our modest Navy salary. And he just said, and that was it. But so he had planted that seed. But for me, I think it absolutely was learning for the fire hose. I mean, you're a new guy, you're starting over again. I had no business experience. I didn't understand what even some of those basic, accounting terms like EBITDA, things like that, what a P&L is and how to read those kind of income statements. Like, it definitely is. It was a learn through the fire hose experience, but it was also awesome. Being in the SEAL teams is very similar in that it's entrepreneurial from the beginning of our history. It's been putting people in charge of things, having them go out and figure out ways to solve problems or make things happen or seek opportunities where we can find employment and make a difference, in the strategic goals of a conflict. And so I think it's very much the same way in business. And I've loved learning those lessons. Some of them certainly the hard way, but I think it's something that's translated well.
You did the military thing. You conquered business as well without traditional training, which is awesome. You teach other businesses how to do it. Let's talk about resilience. Everybody wants to be that hero in the movie and in the book. Everybody wants to be a little grittier, a little tougher, fight through. Everybody's got problems. Through your whole experience, like what very simplistic lessons can we give the audience on how to be a little tougher, a little stronger, a little more less quit?
Yeah, no question about it. I think the thing that you learn going through SEAL training is that you can push yourself way harder than you think is possible. I know that's certainly a key theme for Spartan races and for what you do is that, you're putting people out there like the physical challenges. I think that there's so much connected with physical and mental. And I think so knowing that you could push yourself harder than you think is actually possible. And I think a lot of people are surprised to hear that for me and the guys that I served with, as tough as SEAL training, BUDS, our basic underwater demolition SEAL training, the basic training program, as tough as that is, and Hell Week where you don't sleep for 5 days straight, you're up for 24 hours a day for almost 5 days with just a couple hours here and there of sleep. I was more physically tired and more sleep deprived in actual combat operations than I ever was in training. So combat operations were just incredibly hard, incredibly challenging, incredibly difficult, and incredibly humbling. So I think knowing, number one, that you can always push yourself harder than others, but push yourself harder than you think it actually is possible. I learned for me that going through Hell Week in particular, I was absolutely not even close to being the best athlete in the class. I was middle of the road at best when it came to runs or swims, or some of the physical training. But I realized during Hell Week when it got really hard for other people, I could keep going, and it gave me an advantage. So now it evened the playing field for some of those ridiculously fast runners or crazy fast swimmers when everybody was just crushed, sleep deprived, chafed, beyond imagination and just physically exhausted. It gave me an advantage. And so I think that's an opportunity, when other people are tired, when other people are challenged, everyone else is feeling that too, right? Your competition is feeling that too. So you can use that as an advantage when you can keep pushing through things. From a resiliency perspective, this concept of extreme ownership is a really powerful one. Jocko and I have often talked about this. So often, like, everybody makes mistakes. Everybody screws things up. And so when you try to pretend that you didn't, or try to pretend that you don't make mistakes, or try to make things better than they are, without sharing some really humbling lessons learned, I think the extreme ownership creates some resiliency. We say that it's humbling, but it's liberating. It's humbling to say that it's actually all your fault. It stings your ego. It bruises your ego to say, hey, my team isn't doing what they need to do. My company isn't accomplishing the mission, or we're not succeeding in the way that I think we can. That's my fault. That starts with me. That stings your ego. But it's also liberating to know that everybody makes mistakes. Everybody screws things up. And as long as we can learn from those mistakes and grow and implement solutions, even when terrible things happen in our lives, I've seen people that have taken those terrible things that happen, and like Mark Lee's mom, my SEAL teammate that was killed in action, the very first SEAL killed in the Iraq War, Mark Lee, an incredible teammate, incredible warrior, friend, just somebody that everybody loved and respected and admired. And when he was lost, his mother took her pain and difficulty. Debbie Lee, she's an amazing lady. We call her Mama Lee, and she launched a charity organization called America's Mighty Warriors, and she took the pain and suffering and tragedy of losing her son and utilized that to go out and help others, and to put her arm around people, other Gold Star families that have lost their sons or their daughters in combat or in training, and to tell them that it's going to be okay to find ways to actually help them through. So I think there's a resiliency in this idea of extreme ownership, and it's sharing lessons learned with other people, implementing solutions, talking about mistakes that you might have made, and sharing with other people so you can learn from those mistakes. And even the kind of tragedy and difficulty of losing a loved one or going through some difficult times in your life, even things that are beyond your control, when you could take and use that to help others, there's a real power in that. There's a real resiliency in that.
So let's recap that. So number one, everybody's got, the ability to go further than they think they can. I think you said, I agree with that. We have to have that capability. Otherwise, we wouldn't exist as a species on the planet, right? Like, imagine what we've been through all this time on the planet. Number two, I like your recap of what was going on in Budge training, which is like, yeah, there were faster people, there were more qualified people, but like if you just stay in the game, you start picking things. Like everybody's suffering, basically, is what you're saying.
Everybody's suffering, and then that gives, if you can keep going when others start to kind of falter, like it gives you a huge advantage. And so I realized all of a sudden, like, oh, I can win this run, or I can be right at the front of this thing, or I can. This is actually giving me an advantage. Sure, my feet are all blistered up, and I got horrible chafing, in between my legs where the sand's rubbing me, and yeah, I'm sleep deprived and I'm tired and miserable. But everybody is, and when you can push through that, it gives you an advantage. So that's one of the things that we utilize in combat. When people say, hey, these are really dangerous areas, this is enemy territory, nobody can go in there. We're like, okay, let's figure out a way we can do that. Now, we can take and utilize our skill set to give us an advantage. And I've seen a number of businesses that we work with that we've helped through that have taken advantage of a really difficult problem that other people can't solve, and their competition's struggling to solve. They figure out a way to solve that problem. It gives them a huge advantage, where they're highly successful as a result.
And anybody listening and watching, tell me if you agree. It's easy to just hang in. You might not be the fastest swimmer, the fastest runner, you can't carry the most weight, but everybody could put one foot in front of the other, even though it hurts, right? And get through it. Everybody could do that.
No doubt. And what's interesting about it, Joe, is, as a student of history, I love military history. I read, as much as I can get my hands on. Throughout history, you see that the difference between victory and defeat on ancient battlefields to modern battlefields is often the person that can hang on just a little bit longer. And so when it's, it comes down to just it might be seconds or minutes, but the person that can hang on just a little bit longer it ends up being victorious.
I have a buddy of mine who's a very, very wealthy individual, like ridiculous amounts of money. And I said, what's the number one attribute to being that financially successful? And he said, just not giving up. Like, you don't need IQ. You don't need to start with a lot of them. You just got to be the guy, the gal that just doesn't quit. And then number three, you said, looking in the mirror and taking that extreme ownership helps build resilience. And I agree with that. It's probably a sign of resilience, but also it helps you build, right? Because you're willing to take the punches.
Yeah, I remember a turnover, the last turnover on my last deployment to Iraq, and we were turning over with the next SEAL team that was coming in to replace us. We'd been there for 6 months. We're turning over with them. And I remember one of the key leaders in that the next SEAL team that was coming in there to take our place. He said, this is an amazing turnover. You guys are one of the best turnovers I've ever had. And I was like, really? Why do you think that? I was just curious because I just thought it was kind of standard. We're doing everything we could to try to set the next team up, for success, to continue on with the mission. And he said, you're talking about all the things that you screwed up. I thought that was fascinating. And so, he said, usually people don't want to do that. They don't want to talk about the things they screwed up. And I was like, man, how can I actually prevent you from making the same mistakes that we made if I don't actually tell you about them, if I don't learn from them? We say, mistakes and failure are often the best teacher. And so rather than try to cover them up or pretend they didn't happen or try to blame them on somebody else, that's the kind of thing that I think wrestles with people. Even if you pretend that that's not the case, when you look at the mirror at the end of the day, you're responsible for things, right? You're responsible for your team. You're responsible for things that didn't go right. There's things that you could have done better. And so I think that creates regrets, right? That creates difficulties that people struggle with down the road. Instead of saying, hey, I screwed this up. Hey, I didn't do this near well enough. Hey, I was responsible for that terrible thing that happened. And I think that there's a real resiliency that comes from that in taking ownership of those things and sharing those lessons learned. Even if you can't go back in time. I'd do anything to bring my guys back, to trade places with Mark Lee and Ryan Job, two of the guys that I lost in my SEAL platoon. My brother, Seth Stone, in our other platoon, we felt the exact same way about Mike Mansour, who was killed in action. We'd have done anything to trade places with those guys, but we can't. We can't do that. What we can do is share lessons learned, is bring the lessons, the leadership lessons that we learned home and share them with other people. And so there's a real resiliency in that I think can help you deal with hardship. And you don't have to live with regret, because you could talk about that regret and pass those lessons on to other people so they don't make the same mistakes that you did.
It's an awesome conversation. Most people probably think SEALs are just tough and good looking and strong, but now we know they're smart too.
Well, they can look at me and know that good looking is definitely not one of those.
How do people find you? How do companies that need help, how do they get in touch with you?
They can go to our website, echelonfront.com. That's ECHELONFRONT. They can follow us on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter. Leif Babin, at Leif Babin, LeifBabin. My handles on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And I think if anybody that's interested in leadership, we're constantly talking about leadership lessons, or we're trying to keep leadership top of mind. We say at Echelon Front that leadership is the most important thing on the battlefield. And that's not just the senior person in charge, but if you interact with other humans in any capacity, you're a leader, and you have to use leadership skills to align with others, to work with others, to give them support, and get support from them so that you can be successful in whatever you're trying to do. So if you're interested in learning more about what we do and leadership lessons that we learn from the battlefield and how it applies to every aspect of your life, not just business, but certainly in your home life, in your community, every aspect of your life, check out echelonfront.com. And follow us on social media. We like to share those lessons, and hopefully it's something that can impact your life for the better.
I love it. Thanks for coming aboard.
Appreciate it, Joe. Great talking to you.